We're the early career researchers in polymer physics, and this is supported by the Division of Polymer Physics. Stick around because we'll be raffling off some T-shirts around the end of the Poly merch. Um, okay, without further ado, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the March meeting. This year, try and get this out of the way. This year, the March meeting will be in Minneapolis. I'm kind of excited to go to Minneapolis because it'll be my first time, despite fearing the weather. Uh, Something to know that people keep telling me about is that downtown Minneapolis is connected via indoor sky bridges. Um, so what that means is hopefully we won't have to leave to walk between buildings, at least not too much. Just a note on COVID. There's no mandated testing or anything like that. Um, but there will be masks and sanitation stations throughout the conference center. Finally, another question that I get a lot is a note about dress code. I'll say that I've seen a wide range. People wear all sorts of stuff. As far as like, if you look at the faculty, there's some people that are looking, they're wearing suits, and some more people that are casual. And when you go to students, it gets even wider on the casual side. I'll say, as far as what I do, I wear my Sunday best on Monday and Tuesday. I just try to look spiffy for the first couple of days where a lot of people are there, as opposed to later when it's mostly just students. You need to keep in mind that it will be cold, so get your jackets. Right now I'm in Tampa, Florida, and I don't mean to make you all jealous, but I will. It's like 75 here. It's so sunny. It's wonderful. But next week, we're all going to struggle a little bit, especially if you come from a state like mine. So here's the map. Here's also the convention center. One thing to know, I think I have never mind. I think I have more about the locations later. Moving on, this is kind of the big slide. You can screenshot this, but we will send this to you in a subsequent follow-up email. Some things to keep in mind, as soon as you get in to Minneapolis, there's the Poly reception on Sunday at night. You should really go to that. It's a great way to kind of meet the community ahead of time, make some friends, know who all is there. I'll be there. I know a lot of my colleagues here will be there as well. It's really a great way to start off and kick off the conference. Before that, there's a first-time attendees orientation on Sunday, as you can see here. So that's it for Sunday. On Monday, after a long day of kind of going around, a good idea is to go to the welcome reception. So this is kind of where all of APS meets, not just DPoly, Division of Polymer Physics. You'll see pretty much everybody there. They're going to have food and drinks, and it's a good idea to go there and meet people. Moving on with the schedule, on Tuesday, there's an early career meet and greet. That's a good idea to go to. I know that I'll go to that. I'd like to tell you a little bit about what happens Tuesday night. So on Tuesday night, we've got the DPoly business meeting. In my first attendance at the March conference, I kind of missed that one. I regret missing it. It's essentially a great way to go and learn about what DPoly does, what DPoly stands for, what DPoly is going to do. It's a great way to know about the executive committee and who's in charge and how you can get involved. So make sure you attend that. After that, if you're interested in academic careers or you anticipate writing proposals, another thing that's important to go to is NSF Polymers Q&A, where Dr. Lovinger is going to be telling us a little bit about how to apply for funding. It's a great time. And then right after that, in my opinion, what we're all there for, which is the DPoly Early Career Social. This is the second year we're doing it. But this time we're funding the whole thing. DPoly actually is funding it. And, we're going to have drinks and food. And we encourage you to come hang out with us in Prince Pub on Tuesday night. There's some award sessions to go to and some more DPoly programming. Again, you can go through these yourself. Just make sure you go to the Patton Award to support fellow early career researchers. The last thing I want to tell you in the slide is about the DPoly handbook. So this handbook is essentially just a handbook with all of our activities, all of the Division of Polymer Physics activities. It's a good idea to have it on hand. What I mean by on hand is on your phone. And when in doubt, whenever you've got nothing to do, go and hang out by the DPoly membership desk. There's, where our society kind of congregates, where people go to just hang out. You're going to meet professors. It's a great way to network. And I also recommend that you volunteer at the DPoly membership desk if you haven't already. There's still some spots left on Thursday and Friday. So now that we've gone through these sessions, here's the Minneapolis Convention Center. Here's Gluck's, where the DPoly Sunday reception is going to be, and Brit's Pub is right here. And that's the Tuesday night DPoly Early Career Social, which you should totally go to. Okay, but that's going to tell you a lot about these things, so I'm going to skip through them. Make sure you rehearse a single diagram by slide. I guess, there's no need to go through these since Barat's going to go through them. Some more advice on posters. I'll share this with everybody after the meeting. Now, another thing that's so important, integral for a good March meeting experience. See, there's a DPoly session every kind of, time slot. Well, there's maybe like 5 or 6. I'm not sure. There's a lot of DPoly sessions at the same time. And that's just DPoly. There's so many sessions. It's so important for your experience to kind of ahead of time decide, what sessions you want to go to, stuff like that. And you should definitely not worry about making the trip worth it by making it to as many talks as you can. Just make sure you go to the sessions that you're interested in and don't overdo it. So there's 2 ways that you can learn more about the event. There's this website that's more accessible on the APS website, and then there's the Epitome. Now, a piece of advice from me, the Epitome is the way to go. That's where, it's the big brain thing to do. So let me tell you a little bit more about how I plan my APS trips. I go on the Epitome. This is what it looks like. An important component of it is you can have a schedule, right? And the schedule, basically, as you go through sessions, you can add this event to my schedule, and it just adds it. It has this nifty feature that if you have conflicts, it tells you what you have conflicts with, so you can maybe choose one over the other. Another thing to keep in mind is a great way to kind of take the most out of the conference without worrying too much is to attend entire sessions. So as you can see, I'm very interested in dynamic covalent polymer networks and gels. So I just put the entire session here. So, I think that that's much better than kind of navigating between rooms and going to 12-minute talk after 12-minute talk. So another thing that you can do is the author index. So say you have a PI that you're interested in, put their name here. It gives you all of their talks. Another thing that you can do is a session index. So, as you can see, this gives you all the sessions. You can sort them by day, but the most important feature is this. You can also sort them by sponsor, right? So if I want to just swim through DPoly sessions, I'll go to session index, pick sponsor, click DPoly, and here you go with all of the DPoly events, and you can further filter by day. How are we doing on time? I think we're doing pretty good on time. Okay, so now I've told you how to plan for the event. I've told you a little bit about the March meeting. I want to tell you now how you can network. Now, it's important to keep in mind that a lot of this advice is naturally subjective, and there's a lot of ways to do this. There's a lot of do's and don'ts that sometimes conflict, and that makes the whole thing more confusing. But I tried to compile some of the advice that I have for all of you. But first of all, I'd like to just establish the importance of networking. We're in a field, a kind of work that prides itself on being based on merit. You can't really become a professor or a grad student if you don't have some sort of proficiency. And I don't mean that some people aren't fit for grad school. I just mean that you got to really learn to kind of go through this process. And although we try to highlight merit, really nepotism or at least networking and who really matters a lot. It still matters a lot. So here in this paper by Sevenry, they try to argue that although there's an emphasis on merit, there's still a lot of nepotism, and who you know matters. Here's another really cool paper that I like, that kind of calls it the academia's 1%. And what this paper argues is that there's a lot of hires from places that, families that are elites that can prepare their children for grad school more, kind of the same problem as first generation students. So you can see in this Washington Post figure that I think demonstrates the issue. The fraction of people that are first gen that end up in PhDs is quite low, and it's decreasing. The problem is the same, I guess, for foreign-born students, and you can even see more of that here with people that get PhDs with at least one parent that already has a PhD, and that number is increasing severely. So what this tells you is that there's quite a bit of elitism, and who you know really matters. As you can imagine, I'm not going to bore you with more details, but the situation is far grimmer for minorities. So now that I've hopefully convinced you about the importance of networking, let's talk about how to do it. So again, this is just one viewpoint. I think one thing that you can do, is to go to conferences and present your work. That's, going to give you access to so many people to talk to about your work and connect with. To do this, I regularly try to go to APS meetings and other events. Keep in mind that if you submit an abstract, that gives you access to so many funding opportunities to fund it. Another cool thing about conferences, especially APS, is you're going to see so many scientists that you've read that are in your libraries, and you can really get an opportunity to kind of meet them and talk to them and learn from them. And one thing I really like to do is whenever I meet somebody and kind of connect with them, I like to take pictures. You never know who's going to get a Nobel Prize. um, so moving on, I think the way to go is to be brave and chat with people. Be the approachable person in the crowd, and people will be thankful for it. But then, I can hear people say, well, the stakes are so high. There's so many strangers. There's so many people I respect. What am I to do? Well, what I say is, I think for me, what helps is keeping in mind that it's like that for everyone else too. Everyone else is thinking about how daunting this is, how high the stakes are, blah, blah, blah. And I think for me, my drive is to try to be that person that, kind of makes it easier for everybody, because guess what? No matter how much of a fool you make yourself, you're not going to make yourself a bigger fool than Pierre. um, so another thing that I think is a good idea, whenever you see a senior scientist, try to, shoo yourself in and try to have a conversation with them. I think that is a wonderful opportunity, and we should take advantage of it. So let me tell you a story that I kind of use to give this advice. I'm going to use visual aids here to explain it. Essentially, this was my first conference in my field as a PhD. We were coming out of COVID. All of my networking or speaking or anything skills are out of the window. And essentially, I saw a scene that is all too common in conferences, which is I saw a senior scientist surrounded by students and faculty, and she's kind of talking to all of them. And all I knew was that I've seen this picture before and I've heard this name before, because my advisor at the time was always talking about how cool this professor is and how cool her work is and how much it's influenced my own degree and their own degree. So I saw that and I'm like, gasp. I started looking up, what her contributions are and rushing towards the crowd. So as I'm doing that, I found out, she had a Wikipedia page, and, she invented this tool that I use all the time. And I'm like, I gotta say hi. So I kind of very rudely interjected. It was so inappropriate, got so awkward. And I said, hey, Dr. Sally, my name is Pierre Kawak, and, I'm a big fan of and oh my God, the unbelievable happened. I forgot. I forgot the name of the tool. And then, what I did was I audibly said, oh, shoot, I forgot already. And she started laughing. Everyone started laughing. It was a mess. I was so embarrassed. As you can imagine, I spent that entire trip just avoiding anybody who was at that crew. Although it was like a 10-second of them laughing and then they ignored me, I was just blown away. It felt like a year, caused me a lot of anxiety. I think about it every night. 2 years later, Dr. Sally posted a job in her lab, and I was almost out of my degree. I got my PhD, and I'm like, okay, this is a postdoc I really want. I applied, and I prayed and hoped that she did not remember me. Well, guess what? She remembered me. She remembered me. She remembered the interaction, and she thought it was wonderful. It was a joke to her. She didn't think too much of it. Of course, she didn't. I'm just at the end of the day, it's my first conference. Who knows what kind of pressure? And I just took my shot. Moral of the story is, there's high stakes, but they're not as high as you think. I want to give you a warning to not go and do that, exact thing that I just described. These following stunts were performed by professionals, and I'm a professional at embarrassing myself. Um, so, the last thing I'd like to tell you that I wish somebody told me is if you're looking for a job, don't ask for a job directly. The idea here is, although that's totally fine and nobody's going to scream at you, it's just, in my opinion, if they don't have a job, it kind of forces them to say no to you, which it's not a great feeling, and you don't want that to be your interaction with the scientist. I think the greatest way to do it is to weave it and sprinkle it into your conversation. So what do I mean by that? They say, okay, we're doing this new research. And you say, I'm quite interested in that. Since I'm graduating soon, I'm really looking for labs that are going in this direction. So that communicates what it needs to, right? Without forcing the professor to kind of be in this awkward situation where they're like, no, I'm sorry. And compliments go a long way. If you're a fan of someone's work, go to them. Just tell them, how you use it, how much you like it, blah, blah, blah. So another thing that I think is important, think about what you've got online. Think about, people will Google your name. They'll try to find your social media at this event to try to connect with you, right? So just make sure that your online platforms are, not crowded with the wrong kind of thing, the wrong kind of messaging about who you are. Like goes without saying, clean up your Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Maybe that's obvious for everybody. It wasn't for me. Be ready to share your LinkedIn, make a professional Twitter. I don't know if this is true anymore, but most STEM academics congregate on Twitter. That's certainly true for, our groups, the ECRs in Polymer Physics, Slack Twitter handle, and, me and the fellow admins. Another great thing to do if you're looking for a job is creating a website or at least a landing page. Host the CV on, Google Drive or something like that and make a clickable link. And then finally, if you write code, make your GitHub account public. I kind of zoomed through this. Got 10 more minutes. How about I just open the floor to questions? I see there's some questions in the chat. I'll go through this. Oh, this winter in Minnesota is pretty warm. I love to hear it. Thank you, Ding Bin. Do you have to register for the social? No, you do not. You could just come. At the event, we will also raffle off some t-shirts there. So, if you don't get one today, there's more there. Albert Einstein was at APS last year. Yeah, stop by the expo. I forgot to mention that, but that's always a good, fun time for everybody, especially if you like merch. And boy, do I love merch. If you've got some questions, maybe unmute yourself and ask them. If not, we could just transition to Dr. Venkatesh's slides. All right. Well,
Pierre, just before we move on, there was one comment from when everyone filled out the form for registration to this workshop. And someone mentioned that they want to know how to specifically find the people in their field. So I think you kind of answered it already by all the going to the networking events, checking out the epitome. But beyond that, if you have any specific suggestions.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, like you said, we've addressed a lot of that. It's a bunch of socials and stuff like that. Start off with the deep poly reception. Keep in mind that yes, you're nervous. There's other people that are nervous too. Try to meet people, chat with them. A simple hello is a great way, to leave an impression. And the last thing that I'd like to say, at any point, you're alone, your PI is gone, you want to hang out, I suggest you go and hang out by the DPoly membership desk. It's a great way to meet people. You're going to have faculty going there. You're going to have hopefully very, welcoming people volunteering at the membership desk. It's a great way to meet them and chat with them and get some advice. And, if you see any of us that work for ECRs for polymer physics or volunteer for ECRs in polymer physics, please come by and chat with us. We'll connect you. I hope that answers it.
Yes, that was brilliant. That should help.
Thank you.
Cool. So let's move on to the next part of this workshop where I will be discussing I kind of spoiled it by going to the last slide first. Not what you want to do. So, okay. Just trying to transition to slideshow. And I hope you're still seeing the slideshow. Otherwise, I can screen share again. So for those of you who are giving a talk or presenting a poster or giving a virtual talk at this APSMarch meeting, you would have realized that this is slightly different from all the other talks that you've been asked to give before, because the time scale is limited and you've been slotted in sessions where you probably do not have a lot in common with the other speakers. So a good way to go about this is to think carefully about how you want to tailor your talk. And these are some tips that I want to offer today, which I have gotten in the past and which I've learned based on the number of APSMarch meetings that I've been to. So my name is Bharat Venkatesh. I'm from the UC Santa Barbara campus, and I'm a postdoc here in Rachel Siegelman's group. Cool. So APS, we've already been introduced to it quite wonderfully by Pierre. The scientific sessions, there are many. There are going to be award sessions and invited sessions where the speakers are mostly senior researchers in the field. Most of the audience today to our workshop, as well as most of your contemporaries, are probably going to be in focus sessions and in contributed talks, which are usually 12-minute talks. And of course, you could also be presenting posters. So these focus sessions and contributed talks are where you need to spend your energy on in tailoring that talk and keeping it within 12 minutes. The poster is slightly different. You have to use that space efficiently as well, but you do get enough time to speak to whoever stops by your poster. There too, it is important to keep your poster somewhat catchy and visually appealing for people to stop by in the first place. But APS definitely does a good job of making sure that their poster sessions, especially deep poly poster sessions, are well attended. So you can, of course, go on to this link, which will be shared with you when I share these slides, where you can look up more tips on how to do this. These are tips catered to undergrads. That's what the website says, but I find these tips useful, and I think they apply to whatever stage of career you are in. So let's go about this step by step. The first thing is to think about, when you're doing oral presentations, preparing your talk. So even before sitting down to put your slide together, even before you start collecting all the data or plotting it, even before you do any of that stuff, write an outline, find the story, find how you will move from one part of your story to the other, those transition points, and how they all connect to your overall goal. So you will find your motivation, which is your overall goal, which describes your field, and discusses an unmet need. So for me, that is polymer upcycling. And I will discuss how there are limited number of tools to do what I designed to do. Then you will go about telling them how you did what you did. Your approach. You demonstrated a solution or a development or an experimental technique, or you brought together already known experimental techniques and you combined a specific material or a specific way of using that experimental technique or a simulations technique to achieve what you set out to do. Those results and achievements that you have been able to demonstrate are going to be your key findings. That is going to be the bulk of the talk, and that is going to take up a significant amount of time in the latter half of your presentation. And finally, you leave your audience with some sort of an outlook to the future with possible applications, possible impact of your work. And these core elements form your story. When you sit down to write it, you need not have like very specific ideas of what you want to do, but just having these broad bullets, broad categories, and having bullet points in each of these categories can help you make your talk when you're ready. So I always do this. I sit down, I write an outline, I find what the story is going to be. And as soon as I do that, I'm able to see the slides in my mind. And then it becomes easy actually to make the slides. Another important thing is to tailor the story to the audience of the session. So when you wrote your abstract, we all have done that. We overpromise in our abstracts. We write that we have 4 months when we file in the abstract to when we start, between when we file in the abstract to when we start making the slides. And we think that we will be able to achieve a lot in those 4 months. So you have promised a lot and you want to deliver at least somewhat. You don't want to let down the audience by just completely going in and talking about something else entirely. So people who are there, who've come there to attend your talk, have read the abstract and are waiting to hear from you. So do the bare minimum of tailoring the story to that abstract that you promised, as well as the audience. And another key trick that I learned is to tailor it to the session. So when I say tailoring it to the audience, it of course means there's going to be a broad audience of people that you're going to get your junior grad students, your senior grad students, your postdocs, and your faculty members and faculty in all stages of their career. You want to tell a story which is comprehensive and complete without really going into each detail. You definitely want to give a good motivation. You do not want to be speaking only to the senior faculty in the room. You want to be reaching out to the junior grad student as well. You want to give a motivation of why your work matters. And those who are senior in this field always like to see the motivation, always like to see the core principles being reminded to them. And it's never a bad idea to keep those elements together. Tailoring to the session, though, is a trick that really you have to use, especially for APS, because a wide variety of talks are all coupled together or all put together in one broad session. So sometimes what happens is that people in your session might be discussing the same techniques, and you might be going right after them or right before them. If you're going right after them, it makes sense to cut down on the introduction of that technique or introduction of that experimental method, because someone right before you has just spent their time explaining it. You could also make references to other people in this session about their work and how your work shares a lot of similarities with them. Not that you are both doing the same research, but that there's a lot of resonance in what they've been able to show and what you are seeing. And that is powerful. That shows that you are aware of the field. You are actually there in the session paying attention to others' talks and not just worried about your own talk. So using building in all that at the stage of when you're making slides is important. So at this stage, I recommend people to go to Epitome, look at your session, look at what the core idea behind that session is when you're making the talk. When your session is on crystallinity, you cannot have your talk just not mention crystallinity at all. This is with reference to polymer crystallinity. So similarly, if you have other people in the session who you are collaborating with, or who are from your own lab, you can use your talk to pitch their talk, or you can ask them to make references to your talk and sort of encourage the audience to stay behind for your talk. Also, it's also a great hack for networking because you can see the other people in your session and you can use that to go talk to them even before your session starts. So when you go into the room, you'll already have a number of familiar faces and you would not be so nervous when you're speaking. So another thing to keep in mind is that APS talks are for the most recent results that you have for the rapid dissemination of them, which is why they are 12 minutes and which is why you don't get a lot of time to go into a lot of details. So spend less time on what the community already knows. Do not try to, yes, you want to motivate it. Yes, you want to talk about the core principles, but do not spend a lot of time doing it. Do not state obvious things. Do not spend a lot of time referring to literature that a lot of the crowd probably already knows. And ideally, the split up that I like to do is to have 2 slides of motivation, only 1 slide of the approach, the experimental setup that I have, or the choice of materials, the choice of simulation methods. And this can vary. This can vary, like even among all of us today who have already presented. Maybe you like to do 1 slide of motivation and 2 slide of approach, which is also totally fine. Then comes the results, because they are the key components which you want to spread out into the community. So the results should constitute most of your talk, and they should be at least 4 slides. When you're presenting your results, you want to go methodically, you want to explain each plot, you want to explain the significance of what that plot is telling you, and not just flash plots at people as you go along. And finally, the last slide is conclusions and future work. Just provide them a summary of what you have told them so far and give them an outlook of where this work is headed to and what its impact is on the field or possible applications in real life. So this is the split up that I like. You would see that it adds up to 8 slides. And if you do a minute per slide, you can bring your talk to 8 minutes, which still leaves room for 4 minutes of Q&A. What happens is on the day off, you might not be as precise and you might not hit the 8-minute mark, but even that leaves a little room for error and you might be finishing up in 10 minutes. So I find this split up of slides pretty useful for me, and you can practice and find out what works best for you. So let me show you a slide from one of my APS talks where this is the bare slide. Let's go over each element of that slide one by one. First is the title. You want to make the title tell the major message of the slide. So my titles tend to be full sentences. So here I say what happens with certain class of polymers and what happens with the dynamics. I bring out the core message of this slide in the title. The second thing is cartoons or schematics. So here I have reminded people of the relative length scales in my system by having a schematic. And you could also have schematics of whatever is happening in your system, whatever that you're trying to tell with your plot. Even though you would be saying it out loud, you want people not to get lost if they're not able to hear you, or if they are distracted, or if they just cannot get you, they can at least look at the plots and get a visual idea of what you're trying to say. So, of course, your results are going to be in plots, in some sort of pictorial representation of your data. You can represent that, but you can also leave a little note on the side about what the data is telling you. What is that 1 minute, what is that a few words takeaway of that particular data? And finally, you can also leave highlights of what that entire slide is telling you. I know highlights and title here are sort of redundant, but yeah, on this day, probably I would say I would even remove the highlights and just leave the title, but it's all up to you. You just want to make sure that your slides are, in effect, visually telling the same story as you're telling with your words. Finally, not to forget, you also want to have references at the bottom of the slide and page numbers. The page numbers are important because when people ask questions, they want to refer to your particular slide that they have a question on. And references are, of course, important because you want to credit others' work as well as your own, as well as make reference to your own work. Great. So this is how a typical slide for me looks like. You would also look at how I make the plots. That is all personal preference. Oh yeah, before I move on to plots, there is also this, the research group that I am affiliated with here at UC Santa Barbara has their own template for all the talks that we give. So if your lab or the organization that you're affiliated to has a template of its own, you want to make sure that you're using that template so that the visual theme or visual identity of your organization is represented in the way you present. So look up that and you should be able to find the template, or you can ask senior colleagues. So the way I make plots has gotten much, much better than when I started out. You want to be sure that your axes, the labels on your axes, the points, the legend, everything is visible. So you want to use a legible large font. And when you're distinguishing different types of data, you want to make sure that you have symbols and colors and probably lines to help you distinguish. So I don't have just diamonds here for all of my data and just varied the colors. I have diamond of a certain color, square of certain color, inverted triangle of a certain color, and circles. So that level of multiple layers of distinguishing features between different sets of data actually helps carry forward the information. Because this is what you spend all your time collecting, all your time on. You spend all your time collecting data. But if you do not represent the data well, you are letting yourself and your science down. And that's why, even though it might seem like a bad waste of our scientific uh, intellectual capacity to be making plots or to be formatting and editing plots, to be spending a lot of time choosing colors, but it all pays in the end because you are doing a good job in making sure that your plot or your ideas are easily accessible to the audience. So whenever you're presenting plots, you have to explain the plot. So what kind of plot this is, what does the x-axis say, what does the y-axis say, why were these conditions chosen, and what happens as you move from one, what is the observable trend here while moving from one curve to the other. And finally, there are different ways in which you can save your plot, and I like to save mine as vector graphics. Just Google that if you don't know what that is, but most platforms have a way to save your data as an SVG file, just like you would save it as a PNG or a JPEG file. You can save it as an SVG file. And because these are scaled vector graphics, they scale better and they do not lose their resolution if they are scaled to a larger, if they're blown up on a projector. Cool. Finally, once you've made your slides, once you've made them, once you've found out the story and made the slides, you want to keep editing. And editing is important because you want your slides to be crisp and readable. You want to throw out anything which is confusing or throw out anything which is distracting. You want to make it concise. So when in doubt, always remove, make things simpler. Less is more, as my PhD advisor used to say. Even if you think that you've killed all your darlings, you've gotten rid of a lot of good stuff, less is always more. And finally, typesetting. This is important. When Pierre presented his slide on giving a good talk, he had a bullet list, a list of points on what the ideal font size should be, what the plot dimensions should be, etc. I think we should all keep formatting notes of that sort so that they are consistent across our talks and across our slides in the same talk. So once I've chosen a font, once I've chosen a particular font size for my text, once I've chosen a font size for my title, I note these down and I make sure that all of the slides have the same formatting settings. So keep formatting notes, keep a track of all this. It basically shows that you're professional and that you care about your ability to communicate science. And that is definitely important. So finally, you need to be practicing your talk. You need to be practicing your talk with your group. You need to be practicing it with yourself. So most college campuses now have a phone booth. I'm actually sitting in one right now where you can have the entire booth to yourself and you can practice. You can practice aloud just to yourself. When you do this multiple number of times, you will figure out how to transition from one slide to the other, how to best explain your results, how to tie together all that story nicely at the end. All those things would become much more easy as the more number of times you practice. So set up a practice session if your lab doesn't have one already. Get your advisor to give you comments if they have that time. And of course, time yourself when you're practicing because you want to hit that 8-minute talk and 4-minute Q&A. Give or take 10-minute, 2-minute Q&A also works, but 8 to 10 minutes talk is, I would say, is a good target to aim for. And finally, if you are able to find a room on your campus where you can project your slides and you can run through them, go alone, set that up and look at and once you've projected your slide, go through your slides. So sometimes what happens, this looks great on your computer, but once you project it, a part of the figure just goes out of the frame. You don't want such things to happen on the day of your talk because it'll make you nervous and it'll just throw you off your natural balance. So you want to make sure that you have done the due diligence of doing that proof check, either in your campus or on the APS conference venue, because they also have a room where you can set up your presentation and go through it to double check whether it projects well. I will leave a link to that those are called speaker ready rooms. I'll leave a link to that in the chat. Finally, once you've practiced, once you're confident, the day of the talk arrives. On the day of the talk, dress professionally, figure out which room you have to be in. So here's a big typo that I should have caught. This is from last year. Room 133 in Caesars Forum would be a totally different city this time. So figure out where you are and lead your audience and teach them when you're presenting. You don't want to come across as defensive and just or arrogant and just you want to be conversational and friendly and walk them through the slides and be clear, confident, and in delivering your results. This is something that you've worked hard for, and you need to be up there and present it in a nice, professional way. Finally, if there are technical glitches or if there is a need to improvise on the way, just make sure that you do that in a non-embarrassing way. Just towards the end, if you feel like you do not have enough time, a good way that I've seen a lot of people do it is to say, just leave the conclusions up there and not go through your conclusions so that there's more time for Q&A. That is a good way in which you've handled a crisis well. So this is how you do a good talk on the day of your talk. And finally, yes, virtual on-demand presentations. So this is something that is now becoming part of APS over the past few years, since we all know the reason, the pandemic. If you're presenting a virtual talk, make sure that you do the same things. You make your talk, you practice many times, and you do the speaker ready room check virtually through the APS website. Borrow a nice webcam microphone for this if you do not have one already, or buy one if you think that is a good investment. And make sure that you record yourself once, even if you're doing a live streamed virtual talk, just to see how it looks like. Microsoft PowerPoint has a feature where you can inset your video inside your slides and then export the entire thing as a video. So you can go check out how to do that in PowerPoint if you're going to export a video and send it as an on-demand presentation. If you're doing it as a virtual presentation, you'll be using Zoom. So at this point, I don't even need to say this, but get familiar with the features of Zoom if you aren't already. Cool. For more information, there's always resources. There's always people that you can reach out to. I'll just go over these quick questions that people had when they were filling out the form. So delivering complex problems to general audience seems to be a sort of question in someone's mind. So yeah, as I said, this is going to be a broad audience, and even though your problem is complex, finding ways to dial down that complexity and just focus on the core ideas is important. And I know I say it easily, but this does not come about easily. You have to practice a lot of ways, and you get better with each time you do it. And you also get better with listening to how your advisor does it, or how senior colleagues in your field do it, or how senior lab members do it. Once you see how they introduce ideas and how they cut down on all the unwanted complexities. So there's always going to be unwanted complexities where when I'm sitting down in a talk which is using AI machine learning aspects, I want to know what AI ML told you, what AI ML helped you with, what AI ML achieved for you that you could not get with some other technique. Just focusing on that rather than rather than the nitty-gritty of the AI ML technique that you used is important. So figuring out that sort of unwanted complexity in your talk is important, and getting rid of it will definitely help you uh, keep it to the basics and appeal to a broader audience. How to tailor your talk to the audience of your session, we went through this. Check out who the other speakers in the session are, what the central idea of the session is, so that you know that people are going to be there expecting to learn more about that particular field. And so you can tailor your talk in a way to address that field. And of course, if your abstract has been put in a particular session, it's not been put there randomly. There is some uh, coherent motivation behind that. So you have to figure out why your abstract is in that field and how you can tailor your talk to that. So one example is the first APS that I gave was on porous media. Even though my work was not really porous media, my work was more nanoscale pores. So I made it, that was the first thing that I said when I started the talk, that yes, my talk is going to be different from all the others in this session. And I tuned the audience to what to expect from my talk. So that's also a great way to just, set the boundary, set the playing field. How to field unexpected, confusing, or unrelated questions. There is no easy way to do this. You have to make peace with the fact that sometimes you will get really weird questions because it's going to be a broad audience. And if you do not understand a question, the important thing to do is to ask them to repeat the question, or to say that at this point, I do not understand your question, and we can have a discussion later, or to say that I do not know what you mean, and I do not have an easy answer to your questions. Pierre, am
Yeah, I
I
just want
over?
to add to that, if I may.
Yeah, please go
I
ahead.
mean, just remember, the greatest hack is you're allowed to say, I don't know. You know, remember that. You don't have to know everything. Sometimes, if you want to add to that, you say, this was not within our scope, or, I don't have that off the top of my head. Please come talk to me after the session. Most times they won't come talk to you about this obscure, unreasonable thing that they're asking. But if they do, you've got time, you can look up stuff. Another tip when you're fielding questions, always, always, always repeat the question. First of all, most likely your chair forgot to give the mics, so nobody else heard it. Maybe, always good before you give a specific answer to make sure that everybody in the room can benefit from it by relaying it, right? But that gives you a perfect excuse to kind of think through the problem, right? So you're like, okay, uh, Dr. Whatever, asked me about why this is the delay time that we used when we're studying how long the crystallization happens, or something like that, right? So repeating the question, and remember, you can always say, I don't know.
Yeah, those are some excellent points. Prepare for virtual presentation. Yes, we went through that. strategies. And is there anything specific that I would say about virtual presentations? No, just keep an eye on the clock when you're presenting virtually, and do not let features like chat distract you. You will be taking questions only in the end. Strategies in catering to a broad audience, we went through that. Make sure that you motivate your talk well, so that even if someone is even remotely scientifically minded, they would be interested in the problem that you're trying to solve and the way that you've chosen to solve it. So you do not have to uh, dull down the story or just dumb down the story. You just have to motivate it in a way that everyone cares. Since the slots are only 10 minutes, how would you suggest formatting the slides? Yes, I discussed a possible option that I have. You can try that. If you don't like that, then you can fine tune to arrive at the version that you like best. So yeah, your first set of slides are not going to be the final ones that you present. You're always going to be tweaking and making changes and moving around stuff, the order of things, the order in which you present things. So leave enough room for yourself for all that trial and error, both in terms of making the slides as well as learning how to present it well. Cool, this brings me to the end. I can take more questions from the chat.
Thank you, Bharat. That was awesome. Can I add some things? I'd like to tell people about backup slides.
Yeah.
How that's a good idea. Uh, you know, one thing that I have heard about and constantly find as a heaven sent. I don't remember the author that said this, but he calls it the sledgehammer. The sledgehammer is when you have a slide in your backup slides that you get a question on. Okay, that's the sledgehammer. Nothing feels better than be like, I got a slide for that, zoom through it, and you anticipated this question. Because guess what? Most questions are going to be about stuff that you and your advisor have talked about ad nauseum, right? So don't ever skip a slide, right? If you're editing a slide and taking away, like, I'm sure all of you have a baseline of slides. I hope for your own good that you have a baseline slides by now. If not done slide, right? If you're editing it with what Dr. Venkatesh told you about today, a great thing to do is whenever you touch a slide, just copy it and put it at the end, okay? You never know what kind of question you get. Those slides don't need to be the most pretty, right? It's enough for them to just address some sort of thing, like the methods, right? Like, I like to do 2 slides on methods, but, you might have 15, 4, 5, right, for a longer talk. Move those to the end. Also, something that's important to know is remember that the talk is an ad for your paper. Whenever you're referencing your papers, make that big, put it somewhere people can see. That's another important thing. And then finally, I just wanted to say, if all you've got is negative results, it's totally fine. Tell people a good story, tell people an appealing story, right? It could be your talk could be, we tried this and now we understand why it's not possible, right? That's fine. My first APS talk, total disaster, unpublished work. I didn't have anything, but that taught me a lot because my advisor and I sat and communicated negative results. That's okay, right? As long as you tell a good story, right?
Yep. And with the idea that APS is meant to bring forward your most recent science to a broader audience, it just fits in with that theme, because not all of your results are going to be positive. Not uh, every month that you spend in the lab is going to have like a positive result or a paper that you can publish. There are going to be negative results that still the community needs to know because you've learned something from it. The other thing about backup slides, sometimes what happens is people try to show that they have made a polymer. And if that is that's just an example that came to my mind. If your talk is about you studying the phase diagram that comes about because of the self-assembly of a particular block copolymer, and you've made that polymer and you have got excellent characterization on it. Unfortunately, all that characterization needs to go into the backup sometimes, because you want to talk more about how you achieved that phase diagram more than any GPC trace on the polymer or any TG characterization of the polymer. All those material characterization aspects, if people ask you about it, you have a backup slide. But otherwise, you don't need it there. So figuring out what should be in the main slide and what should be in the backup slide comes with experience, and definitely you can learn that by looking at the slides that other people make from the talks that you attend. What is in the backup slide and what is in the main slide. Cool. If there is no other question, if you want to ask a question, you can unmute yourself and ask a question. We have all the time.
Also, Divya, Anna, if y'all have stuff that we've missed, that's a good idea too.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys did a really good job covering it. I think everyone in DPoly is super friendly. I've had great experiences. So like Pierre said, come by the table, say hello to people, don't be afraid to. And I think there's a lot of questions, not just at talks, but afterwards. Don't get scared if someone like comes up to you after your talk and asks you a question. I think that's like a really exciting opportunity to talk to someone about your research. And it means they liked your talk and they like followed you and we're excited about your work. So, and don't be afraid to go up to, especially other graduate students or postdocs after their talks. If you can't fit yourself in the like 30 seconds, you have to ask a question right after the talk. It's pretty standard to kind of go up to people after and chat.
Yeah, and just a couple other points to add to everything that you all talked about. The first thing I also mentioned in the chat is to have a backup of your slides somewhere, even if you're planning to use your own laptop. Sometimes when you connect to the HDMI or the projector, it could just crash. I know it because it happened to me. So just have a backup somewhere. The second thing would be to remember that it is a long conference, and there's going to be a lot of networking, whether you like it or not. So have a group of people that you can hang out with outside the conference, talk about science, but also other things. And we do have the social that we're hosting at the start of the conference and then the first couple of days. So do take time out to explore other things as well. So yeah, those would be my suggestions.
The long conference point reminded me, thanks Divya, that one thing that I forgot to mention is notice the timing of your talk. If your talk is later in the day, like right after lunch or towards the end of the day, 5 p.m., make sure that you not overstuff it with details. People will be tired by then, especially Thursday, Friday. So yeah, keep that in mind as well when you're designing talks.